So thank you everyone for being here today. I'm going to call the meeting to order. And this is our annual Meet and Confer with the County Executive and his staff. We have a very, very special guest here today, and I want to make sure that we show her the full Montgomery County love. Denise Mitchell, please stand. She's the president. The president of the Maryland Municipal League, and we appreciate you coming here from College Park.
Glad to be here, and I look forward to hearing from the county executive.
Wonderful. We have extra reinforcements.
I don't think you need reinforcements.
But first, I just wanted to open the meeting before we, as we introduce our county executive, to say that we're very happy. This is a different tone this year, right? Just want to say thank you so much for all the work done on tax duplication. I think you have seen some spreadsheets passed out, and I had a really good talk with Ken Hartman today, and he shared that the county is planning to honor its commitment to us on tax duplication in terms of the percentage and the phase-in through FY25. So for that, I want to say thank you. We really appreciate it. This could not have been done without the iterative work of each one of you, really sharing what your priorities are and the history that folks have had to bring this to bear. So it was truly a partnership, and the work that we did together as well on COVID to keep our community safe, to keep people alive, just shows what we can do when we work together. And so these meetings are part of our efforts to try to make sure that we have a pulse on what's going on, that we raise issues that are going on with our municipalities, but also so that we can hear about your priorities and how we can be helpful. So we will have a brief business meeting after our county executive speaks and shares the priorities. However, I just wanted to just start off with a huge thank you.
Welcome. So do you want me to just jump in?
Please jump in. So he'll start in with his quick update, and then I know many of you have sent questions in. I've shared those with this team, and then we'll do a round robin of Q&A if that's okay.
Yeah. So you've got this document, and we're committed to this. We were committed to it when we agreed to it, and we've maintained that commitment. So I feel pretty good about this. When I got elected, this was one thing I said I was going to deal with, because when I was sitting where you're sitting, I used to ask the MML to sue Montgomery County every year. Those of you who go back far enough know that I continually said you should sue Montgomery County. And I felt the same way when I was a council member, that you should have sued Montgomery County. And so I was glad we could actually figure out how to do this without being sued. But it tells you it could have been done a long time ago if the will had been there to actually do it. And we used to call these meetings, when I was on the council, meet and be told what we're going to do to you. And so we've tried to actually elevate the relationship over the last couple of years to make this more of a partnership as we go forward in the county. So I'm excited about that. We are working on our budget now. We just sent over to the council a capital budget, and we are working now on the operating budget. The good news about the capital budget is we were able to fund more things than we were last year. We're in the off year of a 2-year cycle when you're just supposed to make minor adjustments. The inflation in school construction is anything but minor, and you guys are experiencing it probably in any construction project you do. So the schools hit us with north of $140 million, I think, in an ask. We were not able to fund that all of 140. The revenues increases just weren't there to fund it. But we kept the major projects online, and we're hoping, and we've already begun conversations with the Governor Moore's administration and our delegation about tapping into the $2 billion in reserves that they have to try to make the counties whole on the school budgets, because we all have got this to deal with. In addition, this is the first budget in operating where we're going to see big hits that are due to the blueprint. And they're coming a little bit earlier than we had anticipated. When we were all talking about the blueprint, Montgomery County, I thought, had a longer on-ramp before it started to be painful, and it's going to be painful this year. We are talking to the school system. As a former teacher, I'm reminding them that every year, we've added money for programs supposedly to close the achievement gap, and it hasn't been terribly successful. So if you're going to do new things, we expect there to be savings from things that don't work. And you just simply can't say more without being accountable for what you got money for that didn't work. I mean, I know what they're used to, but I have no problem giving them money. I have no problem raising money to do this, but there's got to be an accountability for how money gets spent. Otherwise, it's just too easy to say whatever you say, and we're not in a position to do that. But we're optimistic because there's a lot of stuff in the budget that's important. We have more wellness centers than we originally thought we were going to be able to do, and that's a big issue for mental health for our younger people, especially. There are transportation projects we continue to move forward. There were a lot of the bikeways got delayed because in the scheme of things, we were looking at making sure the schools and major capital projects got funded, and the bikeways, frankly, did not rise to the same level as some of the other things we had to fund in this budget. But there are some in there, but not as many as might have been in there otherwise. And obviously, I did not fund the 800-foot, 900-foot tunnel that costs $85 million because I got other things to do with $85 million. I could put that in there, and then I would ask anybody who questions why I didn't put it in there to tell me what you would take out or how many dollars in taxes you're willing to raise to make sure it stays in there. Just so all of you know, there is a trail that goes all the way up to the Women's Farmers Market. You're not crossing any dangerous streets to get there. You get to Wisconsin Avenue, and we've built the trail on the other side of Wisconsin Avenue, all the way down to where the trail, if it had gone through the tunnel, would have met it. It's a real trail. It's an entire lane that's been taken away from cars with barriers, so it's as safe as it could possibly be. And their objection is they have to cross Wisconsin Avenue at a light. How many of us cross streets at lights routinely? And anybody walking in Bethesda or crossing Wisconsin Avenue or any other place where they're walking or on a bike is going to stop for a light. So if my choice is stopping for a light or spending $85 million, I thought stopping for a light was a reasonable ask. But there's a lot to look forward to, and I think as we start to look at the operating budget, we're also in pretty good shape. Our revenues are pretty sound. Our income tax revenues are up, and they're up pretty well. Our property taxes are up, and the dinging we got was from recordation taxes and transfer taxes. But the net between what's up and what's down is positive. And so we're looking forward to being able to put together a budget that has a lot of things that people expect us to fund. One of the things I'm going to try to get in the budget is an expansion of mental health clinics outside of the schools, because that is probably the number one crisis that we're facing in terms of human services. Whether it's number one or number two with housing is hard to say, but let's just say it's right up there. And this county used to have a system of mental health clinics. The Duncan administration dismantled them. I would like to start restoring them because we've got too many people who cannot get services. Health insurance never materialized as the savior of mental health. It may be okay on physical health, on mental health, not so much. And we've got to figure out how we're going to provide more services. That's one of the priorities. We'll see how far we can go. And we're working with some of the nonprofits to actually shape what we're going to do going forward. We're doing, I think, exciting stuff on climate change. We're finding possibilities of doing more and more things. There's a confluence of lower prices. We just found out, and this is important for all of us, if you're doing a project that has green implications and there are tax credits on it, we used to not be able to take tax credits because, we didn't pay taxes. You can now submit to the Treasury directly and get a refund. And so my $1 million bus, if I had to buy one, if it's got a 30% tax credit embedded in it, I can just submit to the Treasury and say I bought a $1 million bus with a $30 credit, 30% credit, and get a check back. They're writing the regs for how they're going to do that, but it's not a grant program. It's a flat-out refund program. So that could change things. It's changing things for us as we look at what we can do with the budget, and it should change things that you do, whether, if you're putting solar panels on your buildings or, putting in high-efficiency systems that have energy savings. These are all opportunities. So as we learn about it, we'll make sure we bring you, there's no point in you having to learn things twice. When we learn, we'll make sure you get to be part of what we're discovering, because we all should benefit from being able to do this. And I think that, we'll go a long way toward funding the schools, but their operating request is like $249 million over last year. That's a challenge, because that's more than our net gain in revenues this year. So we will, again, talking to the state, we don't know what our final numbers are from the state, so our assumptions are conservative, because unless the state tells us there's some extra money coming, we start with what we knew we got last year and what the rules were around that. So right now, our budget can't show something I don't know I'm going to get. Maybe by the middle of March, we'll know better, but right now, we're not going to be able to do everything that they would like to do, at least not within the budget that exists today. We're negotiating again with police and fire. In particular, we're looking at adjusting pay rates to continue to keep them competitive. We fell out of competitiveness a number of years ago, and our last raise with the police department got us closer to where we need to be, and our recruit class was up to 31. So far, there are 23 survivors. It's always normal that not everybody survives, but it's better than starting with 11 or 13 people. And so we think as we're more competitive, we'll be able to attract more new people. We're getting transfers from other departments because now our pay and benefits are more comparable, and we're looking at what we have to do to stay in place. So that's a priority for us. And those areas, we've put a lot of money into affordable housing. We just, I don't know if you saw the press conference today, but on, Bushy Drive at Veers Mill and Randolph Road, 200-unit development. It has ownership with our partnership with, who am I thinking of? Not Victory, but Habitat for Humanity. And so we've got ownership units in there. The affordability range is entirely between 30% of AMI and 70% of AMI. Nobody's done a project like this in our world, so it's pretty substantial. We've got offers on all 18 properties we put up. I just green-lighted 2 more developments on the parking lots that we're looking at, and we're also looking at other ways of building, not necessarily with bringing in developers, but more managing the project ourselves, because we can get higher levels of affordability if I'm using my property and managing my property rather than selling my property to somebody else. So we're optimistic we're going to be able to further expand affordable housing. You'll see policy things for us like rent stabilization, because rents have just gone out of control. And just as a cautionary tale, Arlington in the year 2000 had a lot of affordable housing. By 2020, everything they had was gone. If it wasn't controlled, anything that was what we call naturally occurring affordable housing disappeared. Montgomery County, we're on the same track. In 2000, we had 42,000 naturally occurring affordable housing units. In 2020, we had 20,000 affordable housing units, and they're projecting by 2030 that we lose another 10,000 of those affordable housing units. And in case you think MPDUs are the savior of the universe, we have 6,700 MPDUs to show for a 48-year-old program. That's it. So ponder that. When you hear the projections for 40,000 households coming here, and you look at the fine print and 30,000 of them need subsidy, and county government policies only produce no more than 15% subsidized units, those two numbers don't meet. And so we've got to figure out what we're going to do to make sure we can come closer. I can never imagine asking developers for 75% of their projects to be affordable. That's probably more than we'll ever get, but we need to get a lot more than we're getting today. And it's a fair exchange for density, because we've given people major increases in density. They like to talk about the transaction cost of building a unit and renting it. They forget the increased value of their property that they cash in on when they sell or refinance their buildings. So I prefer to take a broader look at the income picture for them. So that's sort of, where I think we're going. You should see a lot of progress. And, whether it's climate change or schools or housing, we're well positioned. And as somebody who endured 12 years on a council that once the economy wrecked, it never recovered. We went through a very long recovery. We never fully got back. We're at the point now when our budgets are not same services budgets. We're not doing mid-year savings plans and, shutting down programs mid-year. This year, we've been able to expand things mid-year where there were opportunities to do that. So I think you'll find us in a much better place, and the more successful you are, the more successful you all are going to be. At an economic development, there are like 4 million square feet of lab space, either built or under development in Montgomery County right now. We had no lab space under development when I got elected. I actually was in a meeting with share partners in the state bemoaning the fact that nobody would build lab space in Montgomery County. Well, we've got 4 million going right now. This is a big deal. We brought some major companies into the county, which is a big deal. I believe we're in serious competition for ARPA-H, which will be another, it's not a huge thing. It's only like 200 employees or something like that. But the weight that it brings and the interest it'll bring is really important. And I think about the Institute for Health Computing that the University of Maryland is going to bring to the White Oak, North Bethesda area. This is, in the words of Dr. Gladwin from the University Medical System, he said this will make us the the Silicon Valley of health computing. It is cutting edge stuff. It is the marriage of electrons to wet labs. And more of this work is being done on computer, less is requiring lab work. So we're getting in front, and if we get in front, we were once the center of DNA and we lost it because we didn't pay attention to it. We're not going to make the same mistake twice. And so we're going to make sure we invested. We put 5 years of rent into this building and $15 million in equipment to get the equipment there. They will be equipping the building this spring, and they'll be opening the programs in the fall. So this is not something off in the far distant future. This is going to happen in real time, and I think it's going to be another one of those things that sets us on a trajectory that's much more positive than where we are now. So I'll stop there. Rich, you want to talk about?
Sure. Thank you all very much. And the chart that you have, which shows you how much money we're distributing. As the county executive said, I think one of the biggest accomplishments for the last term was actually working with all of you, sitting at the table with Monique and many of you to get this done. We greatly appreciate it, and obviously we've kept the promise about funding. And I mean, while it still has to be appropriated by the county council, I don't know if we're worried about the county council changing this approach. But remember, a majority of the county council is brand new, so it's helpful to remind them some of this. I think there's a council member there who might remember. Yes, thank you. That about it. So you have both Lori Ann and Kate as huge allies here. But it is important just to check in and remind people about this. So I wanted to introduce who else from the county government is here, so hopefully all of you in this room know Ken Hartman. Ken is the Director of Strategic Partnerships. He's really been the point person working with the chapter. Obviously for many of you in the Bethesda, Chevy Chase area, you've had long relationships with Ken, with his service over the years with the county. And a former employee of the Rockville City government, just so everyone knows. So Jennifer Bryant, who is the Director of the Office of Management and Budget. So she's the person who's toiled to put all this together and to make sure we've kept our promise. Chris Mullen, who is a senior manager in OMB, is there. Chris is the person who actually put this chart together. So beyond many other things. And David Platt with our Department of Finance. David is our chief economist for the county government. So when the county executive was talking about savings plans, I looked over at Beryl because she in OMB lore as a county staff person was running through this building canceling purchase orders in order to balance the budget in what, FY9? So supposedly she was twisting arms and saving money, and so she knows that what 08 to 10 did to the county government and to the municipal governments, and it's nice that we are finally to the point where things are growing and growing at a clip. So hopefully you all noticed the property tax assessments that came out. I know all of the Chevy Chases inside the Beltway, Friendship Heights, Somerset, Glen Echo, all got new assessments this year, and I would imagine they were all very attractive looking. Because I know in just randomly looking at properties in the Chevy Chases, if you're a homeowner, your biggest asset for many people, the government sort of agreed that, wow, it has gone up. I just randomly selected a property that I think is in section 5 of Chevy Chase. So, you know, and it showed it was like in 2000, it was 500,000. It made it up to 900,000 by the time we hit 2006. And then it started to backslide. And from that point on, it has gone from, I think over more than a decade, it's gone from 900,000 to $1 million. And now it's 1.8. You know, and part of it is, when you look at the sale price, you can see how it jumped all the way up. So one of the good news stories, and this obviously does not cover the entire county, but there were a lot of homes in the, when I talk to other people around the state, they sometimes will give me a nice smile when I say this, but there were a lot of residential properties valued at $2 million or above in the county that just stagnated for a long period of time. We were still getting property tax. It's a problem you'd like to have. We're still getting property tax, but it's really been over the last 2 years that the demand for those properties have shot up, and you see that across the board in some of our neighborhoods, and that produces a lot of revenue, obviously, for the county. At the same time, our income tax is doing very well. Probably all of you saw with the November distribution that wages and taxes off of that first quarter of the fiscal year, wages remained very strong, and the income tax off of that remained very strong. And probably all of us saw a surprise reconciliation distribution, which was well below what we were anticipating. What I have discovered from the state comptroller's office is many of you may have heard of a tax filing entity called a pass-through entity. So think of it as a partnership where you might have 6 people who own a limited liability corporation, and all the income is passed through to those 6 people. Under the old way of doing it, the pass-through entity had no tax burden. It was a very simple tax form to file. Because of the change of federal tax laws and the elimination of the state and local tax deduction for individuals, the IRS said to the states, pass-through entities, if you allow pass-through entities, you can let them file taxes and claim the state and local tax deduction because they're just another business, like an S Corp, a C Corp, and if all of them can deduct their state and local taxes, shouldn't these businesses be able to? So the state passed the change in that tax law, so now pass-through entities file tax returns and can go through that whole effort of deducting state and local taxes and then pass through the money to the individual, the owners of the entity. What happened last year is, because this was a new change in tax law, and many of you probably experienced the same thing, where in March, in the first week of March, you got a big distribution from the state, because it turned out everyone who had income from a pass-through entity, their tax returns were going to an error folder in the state computer system. So no one was checking that error folder because they never had to do that before. So it was only when we in Montgomery County were calling and saying, this doesn't make sense. The state has record tax revenue for income taxes and the counties don't. It's all the same taxpayers. If you're doing well, we're doing well. So sure enough, they brought in a forensic accountant, they found the error, and we all got this big distribution. We got $70 million in the first week of March that we weren't expecting. So this year, the state has informed us that part of the complication, they cannot process any of the individual tax returns with pass-through entity income until they process the pass-through entity tax return. So they've had to put all of them aside and wait. They only just finished them. So all of you should know, in January, you're going to get, we will all get the final reconciliation distribution from tax year 21 in the January distribution. So it should be a much different looking January distribution than you're used to. So, and it should be good news, because once again, calendar year 21 produced the largest ever income taxes for the state of Maryland. And all of those taxpayers are our taxpayers too. So I would imagine you should be looking with excitement for the January distribution to come out. I know it's going to be like Christmas for me. I can't wait already for that number to come out. So anyway, we gave you all sorts of additional handouts. The county executive went over the capital budget. One simple handout, it's the one with the pie chart on it. I'm sorry, some of the things aren't labeled. We were rushing to get some things done because some meetings ran over. So this just gives you a sense of where the money is going. We have a $5.4 billion capital budget for those 6 years. Where's the money going? And then the beautiful bar chart on the other side shows the changes. As the county executive said, you can see that the money for MCPS went up and the money for transportation came down as he had to make some hard decisions about what we were going to fund or delay based upon the constraints we have and the amount of money, obviously, that we can borrow or put into the capital budget. The county executives are working with the other county executives around the state to aggressively get more funding for schools because of the enormous inflation that has occurred in the price of schools, and it's been across the state. So we're working in tandem with the other governments to get relief. But this gives you a simple sense of where the money is going and what changes he's had to make in the distribution. The OMB website has an enormous amount of information about all of the projects. You can drill down on it. The whole budget is up on the website, as well as a very nicely worded message from the county executive that is a narrative form that explains what transpired. We also have this wonderful handout that David produced about the economic outlook for the county. It is the one big stapled packet that Ken handed out initially. So,
Does everyone have that?
No.
so Ken has more copies right in front of him and is rushing your way with a copy. So, but you know, this is mostly good news. I can run through it really quick and then we can answer questions. But starting on what is labeled slide 3, again, weekly wages increased by 6.5%, and you can see the increase has been occurring for years and how it accelerated over the last few years. When you look at per capita income, again, never higher than in FY21 for our county. And just in the 4 years that Mark has been county executive, it's gone up by $7,000, which is an enormous increase. And I would imagine 22 will also look quite strong. When you look at the rate of inflation, obviously on page 5, we all know inflation is up. This is what it is for the Washington metropolitan area. We benefited and also paid a price for the low inflation for many years. Now this has gone up, and you can see how substantially it's gone up, and we'll see if that continues or actually starts, I think, to come down, which seems to be happening at the federal level. The next chart shows you the impact of the pandemic on the total payroll employment within the county and then labor force employment. And so the first, on page 6, I think I have this correct, page 6 would reflect the people employed in Montgomery County, the jobs located in Montgomery County. Page 7 would reflect the jobs, the number of people from Montgomery County who are employed. So I think to me, obviously we saw a drop in employment, and certainly many aspects of the economy were hammered early on in the pandemic, but you see the recovery that occurred through 2022. I think on page 7, part of the drop is associated with the number of people who used the pandemic as the moment to retire. We have the oldest average age in the metropolitan area. So I think you had, I know personally, we probably all experienced this in our lives. We saw plenty of people who decided this was a good time to finally retire. And and you had job loss. But I think it's not just job loss that is driving these numbers. One of the things that I know the county executive has been pushing on, he has spent time with Stephen Fuller, who is the longtime dean of local economists at George Mason, and Professor Fuller has proposed that and found data that shows Montgomery County has far and away the most number of sole proprietorships in the metropolitan area. So people who are, in essence, working for themselves. And a lot of the data that you have from the federal government is designed to track either people who are employed by someone else or employ other people. And so the whole idea of a sole proprietor often can get lost in the federal data sets. And I know from participating in the meetings with him that part of it is you have people who have just decided once they left their full-time employment, they just started, in essence, their own gig consulting. And they're not driving an Uber, but they are consulting because they had some specialty skill, and they're now just doing that. And because we have a very large, fortunately, foreign-born population, we have a lot of people who are doing business as sole proprietors in other countries, the country they came from, the regions they came from, and that there's an enormous economic activity happening, not under the table, but the federal government, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, doesn't have a good way to capture those numbers because employment is going down, but revenue is going up to the highest levels ever. There's some disconnect. Maybe a lot of people are working 2 jobs. We've often heard stories about people who are working 2 jobs at the same time because of the ability to Zoom. I've heard stories of people who are working in a Zoom meeting and working as an executive chef, so they're cutting their vegetables while they're participating in the meeting. They're running 2 jobs, but I think that's few and far between. I think there's a lot of activity. The data from the federal government just doesn't pick up.
Can I make a point about that real
Sure.
quick? Two things that was in Fuller's report, which was drawn from Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers, so he wasn't making it up. 24% of Montgomery County's income was attributable to this segment of the economy. It is multiples of any other jurisdiction around here. And the average income on these jobs was twice the region average for what the jobs paid. So it gives you an idea that they're probably a little bit more significant than an Uber driver. And it kind of bespeaks the fact that there's a lot of folks out there in this county who figured out they can be consultants, so they work on their own, and they're not part of somebody else's employee. And it struck me as really odd. And Fuller's comment was, you can't measure Montgomery County's economic vitality strictly by the traditional measures when you have this much of your workforce that doesn't show up in the federal reports. So it's kind of interesting. I found it fascinating.
I have a question for you on the budget and what's going on in the environment. So I received a couple of questions from folks in advance. I'm going to try to keep them topical. I'll start with what I've received, and then I'll open the floor, if that's okay. But since we're talking about economic development in the budget,
No, but that's.
and how are we doing with commercial and retail? And where do you see that going? I know there's been a tremendous period of transition given the pandemic.
I think there's a mix of things. We're beginning to see conversions of office space into lab and science uses. And I know initially there was some concern whether office buildings would be able to do that transition. I was out at the Henry Jackson facility off of Democracy Boulevard, and they took one of these office buildings and made it into a major lab building. They're anticipating doing more of that. And we're seeing this up in Gaithersburg, Germantown area, that conversion. So empty office spaces, finding a home in the scientific realm, and that's a real positive thing. And obviously there are some opportunities for conversion to housing, which I would welcome, because if we got empty buildings, this is a way to put them back on the tax rolls if there's an ability to do that. The private sector is likely to continue to see a shrinkage in demand for office space because they're like us. They don't need everybody coming into work. Nobody's going to rent space for the sake of renting space. You're not renting more than you need. So I would anticipate a continued contraction. It'll stabilize at some point. Maybe everybody will say you all are working 3 days in or 2 days out, or the reverse, but it's not going to be the way it used to be. And so new opportunities to use existing buildings are there. I think Virginia's had a couple of large buildings that got converted into housing. So we may wind up with opportunities out like that. I do think in general, and one of the reasons, the project in White Pine, I literally worked on for 3 years. I mean, people heard me talk about it. It took me 3 years to convince WMATA that they were going to issue a joint development agreement they're going to pitch their 14 acres as life sciences property. Every single developer around there is turning their properties from residential, which they're not building, or office, which they're not building, to life sciences. And JLL understandably didn't believe me when I said this is what you ought to do. So, not JLL, but WMATA, but they wound up hiring JLL to do a study for them, and JLL came back and told them life sciences was the highest and best use of their property, not just that metro station, but they suggested that other metro stations could use that as well on the red line on that side of the county. So I think we're going to see more companies come here. I think the AI Center is not just going to be good for the research that we intend for life science, but it's going to attract AI companies here. They are going to want to be next to the University of Maryland, which is, the signature people in terms of quantum. They are at the top in terms of AI. Interestingly, they put the biology department under the math guy because of the convergence between these two things. So it's really, really interesting. So I think you'll see opportunities, and I think in the big picture, when I first got elected, I asked a company why they had never come here, and they said, because there's no there there. And I said, what do you mean there's no there there? And I said, well, you got Bethesda, and you got really expensive housing and restaurants, but you have no signature. And my view is that, putting a signature on that metro station around life sciences, where both WMATA and the private owners begin to try to create a life sciences center there. And my vision was something akin to Kendall Square. I'll never get the old buildings and the character, but you can build character if you're sensitive to it. That having a win like that and putting ourselves on the map makes us interesting to other people. Because, we're not interesting to people right now, frankly. It's hard, why would you locate here? You're not close to an airport. The airports are a major problem, and I have no easy solution to not having an airport here. But we can make this place appealing in the sense that people look at us and say, this is dynamic and the county's willing to change. If you were a developer now, you would find our processes far less onerous than they were when I came in. I have proposed, and I'm going to continue to propose, that the county basically merge parking planning departments that are regulatory into the county, like every other county in the state of Maryland, in Virginia, and probably the United States, which doesn't get rid of the regulatory piece, but it means that if you're a developer, you walk in the front door of the county, this is what you need to do to get your project approved. Your project goes over to the planning board. I am not tampering with the planning board. And when he leaves the planning board, it goes back to the same group of people, and it goes out the door. You do not have the planning agency saying, I want this street 22 feet wide. Our DOT people saying the street needs to be 24 feet wide. And if planning wins, you get a situation like we have in Clarksburg where the fire trucks can't plant their feet in some of the streets there. The feet are the thing on the side of the trucks that stabilize it. So we can simplify this. It will cut probably half the time in development, which is time and money. If it takes a year longer, you've got a year's extra carrying costs and a year of extra inflation on the projects you're dealing with. Today, when we were cutting the ribbon on this project we started over off of Bushy Drive, one person got up and said, took 5 years to get this done, and that was fast. It shouldn't take us any more than 2 years and probably 1 year for somebody to walk through the door of park and planning, say, this is what we want to do, get the approvals, and get the thing back out on the street. And if we can do that, we won't have a problem of getting people to come here. The other thing is we're proposing getting rid of the impact taxes, which sit on the front of every project. They have to be financed. So as somebody explained to me, in the development world, any project in Montgomery County, if the land price was the same and the construction price the same, will always pencil out more expensive because of the impact tax. So what Northern Virginia does, and for those of you who look at Northern Virginia as the Mecca, they don't have impact taxes. They have development districts. They issue bonds on projects that are going to be built. None of the money goes to the general fund. It builds infrastructure for development, which is what developers need in order to attract people there. And if you know Jeff McKay, when I asked him, big difference between Montgomery County and them, they said, if we tell a developer we're going to build a project, let's say like the Purple Line, we tell you it'll be done in 2 years, it's done in 2 years. Montgomery County and JLL confirmed that. They said, if somebody says, how long will it take the county to do something? The answer is we have no idea. So my goal is to make sure that I can give somebody an answer, that my answer is as good as Virginia answer, and that my financing structure is parallel to what Virginia does. Rich may share some of the tax information we have, but if you were developing in Tyson's Corner, you pay $1.65 a square foot, $1.15 base tax, 12.5 cents on every square inch of commercial property, every square inch. 0.6 of 1 penny of their sales tax goes to transportation, and then Tyson's Corner has 2 special taxing districts, which bring their total tax burden to $1.65. Montgomery County is about $1.03. So they're not going over there because they're cheaper. On the other hand, they can get them out the door quickly, and we can't do that. So certainty and time matter. And I could copy their taxes. I don't need as much because we're not building heavy rail, but I could copy their structure. We could reduce the times, and that's what we need to do to be competitive. And if you understand it and you look at what other people are doing, this is where we need to go. So all this fuss about park and planning, and am I going to destroy it and take it over? Nah, I just want to make it work like it does every place else in the state. And you should want that too, because you run into it.
If you're looking at the commercial valuations, downtown Bethesda, downtown Wheaton were both in the zones that got reassessed this year. our commercial property base went up by like 19.7%. So good growth. The important thing to note about commercial properties, that the assessment is based upon the revenue off the property, not like homes, which is the structure of the land. And remember, property owners can ask for a reassessment at any time. And so an office building loses their main tenant, their revenue drops, they can come in and get an assessment. And then that puts themselves then, for the next few years, they're flat. And then when they get reassessed, if they have a new tenant, it phases in over time. So you lose that revenue. And that's obviously something that DC and Virginia don't have.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one question. So before the meeting, we learned that the 90% is going in for next year. Thank you very much. And we'll get these documents so we can distribute to everyone. I do want to advocate for Tacoma Park that we figure out what the calculation thing is. So do you want to say anything about that, Mary?
Thank you. The error is in our favor.
Okay.
We are happy about it. So, thank you very much.
So we appreciate
Thank you very much. So we appreciate that. I'm going to open the floor if there's any budget, economic development questions, and then we'll move over. I know there's a couple other topics that folks sent in advance. Go ahead.
Rich, would it be possible to get the fuller report?
Yeah.
So we have it.
Mhm.
Anyone else?
Over here.
Yeah.
So I'm a little taken aback by the transportation budget bar going down. Are we likely to get federal money with all the new programs that they have going on? Is there a ray of sunshine on this potential?
Well, I mean, the causation was because of our structure. It was basically schools or that. And something had to give. And so most of what's gone is bike projects. It's not all of what's gone. And there's some delays. But on the major things, like trying to move BRT forward, we're actually pushing even harder. We're, ready to submit to the feds for some projects. I'm going to make a pitch to the governor that they need to look at what we're doing in White Flint the way they looked at what we were doing for Amazon in White Flint. If anybody remembers, Amazon was going to get 3 BRT lines. They were going to fix there was going to be a northbound ramp that came off of 270, the spur, I guess, and went north instead of making you go down to Marinelli and U-turn. Well, not Marinelli, but whatever that area it was. So there was a lot of infrastructure that they were going to put in there, because the truth is, whether it's 10 million square feet of Amazon or 10 million square feet of life sciences, which I do think we can do in 10 years, the traffic there will not be sustained on the road system there. So we're going to make the pitch. This is not just the county asking for an obligatory road project and some money. I'm going to ask for 300 or 400 million. I don't know if I'll get it, but to say you need to put this money in here, because without this, all this other stuff will never materialize. If we don't have the transit, then we will not be able to do, and remind him what Virginia's done. They dwarf us on the fact that all that money I outlined to you goes to transportation. We have nothing comparable to that in Montgomery County. So if you want to know, I tell people, if you look at somebody else who's taken your lunch, you need to figure out how they got your lunch. And it is not an abstract question. It is a real thing. Virginia beats us because they can deliver infrastructure. And that's because they tax development in a way that we don't tax development.
The county executive has challenged the entire county government to go out for more funding, to find state funds, to find federal funds, to access the money in the Inflation Reduction Act, the money in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, that we have to be aggressive doing that. We are trying to beef up our staff who have that experience so that they can be better at pulling together the proposals that do get funded by the federal government, because it's a way to keep up with all of our infrastructure needs, at least in the short term. And the major change, again, that the county executive referred to in his talk, the major transportation project that pushed out, so that's why the chart goes out, is the biker pedestrian tunnel through downtown Bethesda, it's 900 feet, that runs under Wisconsin Avenue that was part of the Purple Line project, but it's a completely second tunnel that has to be built. And it was penciled in initially as $15 million when the project was first approved. It is now up to $82 million in cost for that tunnel, and the county executive outlined why he thinks an at-grade crossing of Wisconsin Avenue connects the two ends of the Capitol Crescent Trail seamlessly and safely without the expense of the tunnel.
Thank you. We were going to ask that question about how are you gearing up to make sure that Montgomery County gets its fair share of the Inflation Reduction Act, so we're glad to see that you're getting dedicated staff for that. So that's great.
And we finished the joint priorities letter to the new governor about transportation, because so much of accessing federal funds is about having the State Department of Transportation on board with it.
Right.
We don't know who the new Secretary of Transportation is going to be, unless I missed the announcement in the last few hours.
No.
That seems to be one of the two remaining question marks. But I think we will have a very different relationship with them, and I think we are beefing up our Department of Transportation in order to specifically address the opportunities that come with the enormous amount of federal funds that still really haven't been pledged for projects.
And then that will help us on transportation. There's, I think, also some things about looking at some of the redlining that was done between some of the metro stations and others to bridge sides of communities together.
Yep.
And then also climate. So municipalities also care very much about that, and we'll be working with MML to get information about that too.
We're going to get a briefing from a consultant that presented in Mako for us.
Yeah.
And she kind of laid out where the federal funds were. I've told my staff that bag this idea of what we need for the next year or two, but to put in anything you could possibly imagine that we could build and see how much federal funds we get. We'll deal with the money, we'll deal with the funds when we get them, but I didn't want to shorten our horizon to just what we had planned to do for 2 years, because that was a constrained scenario.
Thank you.
First, I want to.
Sorry, can everyone say your name, just because we have some new folks here?
Carol Conger.
Yes.
I want to applaud your emphasis on the community mental health plans. Having been around in the 90s, I saw what happened for services for those who really need mental health services, number one. But I also want to make sure that addiction services don't become the stepchild, because we've all seen that people go into the emergency rooms, which is not a good use for detox and sobering. I think we all agree on that. That's not a good use for the hospitals. But that what it does mean is we need to have more services for addiction services here. The opioid crisis has not gone away. We've all seen that in the numbers, especially during COVID and its aftermath. So I'd like to put the plug in that we do remember addiction services.
I know it's on the governor's agenda, and we've already started talking to people up there that we're willing to make an investment on our own. We need the state to step up. And our pitch to the state basically is we're ready to do things. We're not in the experimental stage anymore. So if you give us money, I won't tell you I'm going to do a study. I will build you something.
Go ahead. I was going to just say one thing. I heard from Poolsville, a quick question yesterday. How will you be looking at the budget to make sure that there's some level of equity in terms of the county? And you're specifically talking about the west side of the county.
Well, we were addressing that with Poolsville is going to get the services in the center that they wanted, because we thought it was important. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize the poverty that exists in and around Poolsville, because everything looks so nice and new and shiny, but there are all these townhouse developments that are not, and there's a large migrant worker population up there that nobody knows about because you never see them. So we recognize that, and then we've embedded that in what we're going to do, and we're working very closely with them.
Thank you.
I'm Dia Costello. I'm the mayor of Glen Echo. I'm also a clinical social worker. And just shout out about what you're talking about, mental health work. One of the things that perhaps could be tapped into is working with universities who have trainings for social workers and psychologists, and really that would be something that's very unusual. That would be very exciting to do, and we, of course, need more and more clinicians.
How are you thinking about tapping, or what do you think? Because you thinking about a relationship to their graduates, or are you thinking about how to work with students in the last year or two of the degree process?
Right, so I would work with people getting your MSW, right? But also you need X amount of hours after you get your MSW, so you need those internship supervised hours.
The county executive doesn't know this, but we were actually meeting about that yesterday afternoon to develop a proposal for him. So, the amazing thing that goes on within the organization. So now he'll be looking for it. I should get my mouth shut, right? But that's,
On the topic of mental health, which also touches safety, we've been seeing that where our youth are engaging in some risky activities. We're seeing the tying with ghost guns, tying with substance misuse. So what are we doing to try to provide positive services and opportunities for folks to get involved so that we're diverting and giving, going a positive path versus a negative path, and then also expanding mental health services?
Well, I think we talked about expanding mental health services. I mean, that's, as quick as we can do this, we'll do this. And the more we get from the state, the easier this will be. And we've talked about expanding summer programs. We could do more than we've been doing in the summer. I don't think everything begins and ends in the schools, so we need to reach people who are above the age of 18 and out of school. So I'm intrigued by the governor's proposal for a year of service, because nobody likes to talk about it, but the fact is that MCPS, a huge portion of that population leaves school unable to read or write effectively or do math effectively. It makes them virtually unemployable, except at the lowest level jobs. And if I were a kid facing that, I might look at my future and figure, what the heck, what difference does it make what I do? And so, my goal is to work with them on that, because I think it's an opportunity to take people, get them some training, but not cut them adrift. Because when they walk out that school door for the last time and you don't know where you're going to work and what you're going to do, it is a playground for all the wrong stuff. And so hopefully we'll work with the governor to make sure that we are very actively participating in what he does, and then do our own thing in terms of trying to expand employment opportunities beyond where we've been able to go already.
I would like to make sure that, Talicia's your seat, Mayor Tacoma Park, that as the county is engaging in those discussions around program creation, that you're keeping municipalities in mind. So many of us during the pandemic forged a number of different youth programs, workforce development programs, use those ARPA dollars to try to fund these temporary initiatives that without additional funding would likely expire once those ARPA dollars expire. Particularly recreation, increasing the number of recreation scholarships, trying to increase our recreation capacity. One of the biggest things that's important in order to engage youth is to make sure that access is easily obtainable, that they don't have to get on 3 buses to go to downtown Silver Spring in order to find a safe place to play. So really making sure that as the county is soliciting those additional resources from the state, that we, municipalities, will find ourselves in a situation where we're able to talk about tax duplication, but also how we may be able to leverage some of those resources to enhance our recreation service capability within municipalities.
I would say at the municipal level, be sure you're asking your delegates for, bond issues. I don't know the issues.
senators.
And senators. Your delegation, can I do delegations? Does that work? Yes. Be sure you contact your delegation for bond opportunities, because I honestly don't know every bond opportunity that exists in every municipality, but you do. So if you see opportunities, we've got some really aggressive delegates. We're the largest delegation down there. And I've got to fix this. Okay, delegations.
legislators.
Good, that's another word I can
Yeah.
use. Okay, so you get the idea. But you,
Some of them focus on, we've heard from some of our delegations that they want to focus specifically on CIP, capital improvement efforts, less on the soft service piece. So that's something we struggle with as well.
but it's not a bad thing, because, one of the biggest problems we have is I could envision creating a program, putting it in a place is a way different thing. So if you can get capital for spaces, the operating cost is something we're more likely to be able to share. I've been approached, we were talking about this today. There are so many different ethnic groups who do not have places to meet and feel disconnected. And one of the things we've talked about is being able to figure out where can we create facilities, nice when they're an existing facility, that we can provide spaces for people to gather. So to the extent you all can envision building something, I think funding the operations becomes a whole lot easier.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions on this topic. Oh, there's a lot.
All right, just John Ashby, Gaithersburg. Just to sort of dovetail on these points, and sorry to be a little prudential here, but earlier this week we had our first public hearing on the redevelopment of Lake Forest Mall. And huge deal for the community. We got over 30 testimonies, many of them, in fact, most of them were from outside the city, from the Montgomery Village area. A lot of youth and youth-based organizations in front of us talking about the need for a recreational facility. Obviously, we, in the city of Gaithersburg, we have our own facilities that are sort of centrally located. It makes sense, a place that makes sense to serve our residents. But since Lake Forest is right at the border between the county and Montgomery Village and Gaithersburg, it may make sense, and there may be opportunity. I just want to flag this for you. There may be some good opportunity for a partnership on a new facility as part of that redevelopment. So just to plant
Yeah,
that seed.
and that sounds like a great idea also for a bond bill, because every dollar, we can pull down some money from the state, and I hear Senator Kagan has a connection with the governor, so, as what the first
We
legislator
heard that too.
introduced, endorsed him, so maybe some ideas of ways that we might attract some additional state dollars to make the project bigger or quicker.
And
Just file it away. Just file it
don't forget the magic of negotiating with the developer and saying, you want density, I need a center.
Okay. I'm
Got
watching time, so I'm just going to take 2 more questions on this topic, and then we have 2 more topics to answer.
Okay.
This was just a follow-up to the notion of partnership on these, on mental health, on recreation, on some of these other points. You're open to that?
Yeah.
Just check, just check it. Yeah, because we have a few specific things and a search lots of those in these high priority areas. That's it.
And we'll just follow up with Ken to get the contacts.
Carol Hunter, just a quick item on it. I see that the revenues are in, that's great news. I wish I lived through some of those years. I didn't, I was on the other side. However, when I read a lot of the papers in January with all the people making prognostications for 24 and 25, and, there have been some who have said, there could be a soft R, recession. So what are the thoughts, or what are you seeing for 25 and 26? Because it's great to spend now, but we need to make sure all that money is still there if it is a soft recession.
If it drags to 25 and 26, it's not a soft recession. So, look, one of the things I think we took away from the last recession, we made some decisions that were not necessarily supported on the other side of the street. And it turned out that
The COVID recession.
We were right about where this was going to go. We did not collapse. Our revenues did not collapse. One thing we found is the unemployment now seems to target the most vulnerable populations. And the bad news, it's the most vulnerable populations. The good news, it's the people we rely least on in terms of providing a tax base. So we have the irony of record unemployment and record tax income. So I'm not convinced that a recession will be, something will come. There will be a there's no way I don't think you avoid some downturn.
Services too.
Yep.
Let's be honest about
Well, we're enduring that now, so, but hopefully what we build now will put us in a position to serve people. I would like to have clinics in place and capacity in place, rather than try to put it up in the middle of a crisis. Dealing with COVID, where everything was, something bad's happening, we have to do something about it. I would prefer to get ahead of it. So we'll work to get ahead of it. But our reserves are really strong.
I know they're on there.
Yes,
And now.
yes.
Oh, but we've never hit these numbers before. It's not just now. These are numbers that no one's ever hit. So we're above 10%. So we've managed this differently. I think we can withstand this better than we could withstand the recession, the last real recession we had, where we had 6% reserves and we almost lost it all. We're not, that's, yes, we're not.
In 2000, right, in 2000.
We are not
yep.
there now. That's the good news.
Yep.
Yes, I do, but I don't know if this is appropriate.
Please do, go for it.
Again, Denise Mitchell, Mayor Pro Tem, City College Park, President, Maryland Municipal League. While you're here, County Executive, again, thank you for being here. I just wanted you to be aware that the league and the membership approved one priority this year, police accountability, and looking at having the Annapolis legislation present something more enabling legislation that municipalities that want to choose to have an accountability board can. My question to you is that at the county level, would you be willing to support that for Annapolis? Number two, if you have a police accountability board here in the county, would you be willing to look at some municipal leagues serving on that accountability board?
I'm not sure who's on the board, whether, I don't know if it's municipal, these were not municipal leaders, these weren't leaders, period. These are citizens. So I wouldn't put a leader on, because then I'd have to put,
An
where are my
elected
leaders? Am I going to put people on from the county council because they want to be on there? I mean, this is supposed to be a public accountability board. But I'm totally, I have no objections to municipalities setting up their own, and setting them up any way that you're comfortable setting them up.
But we also only have 4 municipal police departments in Montgomery County. So
Yeah.
unlike,
You're in a very
I know
different-
Prince George is in a very different,
23 out of 27.
right, right. So it's a very different,
On the issue of just mental health and police and just activity that's happening, we've seen a spike in bias incidences. Some of them may not rise to the level of hate crime just yet. But how is the county tracking? And if we don't have a tracking system, can we develop one?
We keep data on everything, and we've acted really aggressively. I mean, we've met with communities that have been attacked very quickly to make sure that they understand that we will prosecute anything they need prosecuted, that we're on the lookout. We've provided extra protection. I think you all know we've given, and we're going to give again, money to nonprofits that have been victims of hate crimes in order to secure their facilities more. So we're very much interested in making sure that we keep this place as safe as possible, and that the people, the victims, are not confused that this county is on their side very clearly.
and I know you have Chief Jones coming to your next meeting. You might want to ask him to bring the assistant chief that we just appointed, Nick Augustine. He has the unit that specializes in hate crimes, and his testimony before the county council was focused a lot on hate crimes and what we need to do to help patrol officers who might be the first on the scene to understand when it's a hate crime and deal with that situation. So I don't know if you want to extend that invitation through Chief Jones. We can also talk about it, but he also has the distinction of being the first member of the LGBTQ population to be an assistant chief of our police department, and probably when you think around the country, to move to that rank is relatively unusual for someone who is an out member of the LGBTQ population.
And with their town, Kensington, just going back to the discussion around the Infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Act, it's great you're staffing up. How can municipalities have input into putting together the request? Will you be sharing timelines of when, key initial drafts have to be developed of plans, and as we have projects that we know are on our horizon, how do we get them in on the table that you're concerned?
So we will invite you to this meeting with the consultant to kind of lay out, because my people don't have a clue what's coming and how to approach it either. So we're going to get educated. We can make sure that you all are able to come, if not there in person, maybe we can make the Zoom available so that you all get the opportunity to take advantage of it.
Thank you. On housing,
First of all, I'll just say from the city of Rockville, thank you for partnering with us on Scarborough Square. We also recently redid Parkside Landing, and so those were critical opportunities for folks to be able to have an affordable place to live in the city. We saw another property that was bought around the same time, and the rents are very high, much higher than some mortgages. So thank you for your partnership on that. How can we, you talked about MPDUs, for example, and they do expire. How can we look at expanding more affordable housing opportunities? And is there an incentive that we can give so that if they expire, that these units will be preserved?
So we're at the end of expiring MPDUs. The MPDUs built before 2005 had either 10 or 20-year lives on them, and then I guess people thought the problem would go away, and so they expired. Anything built after 2005 has either 30 or 99-year lives on them. So those you won't be seeing going away very soon, but there aren't very many of the others left. So they will come up. We're prepared. The reason we created and expanded the fund for rapid acquisition was to allow somebody to act very quickly if something came on the market, so you could act before the timeline ran out. And a lot of the nonprofits told us that it takes time to put together a deal, and they didn't want to have the certainty of a deal made before they could buy the property. So we can, if you think it's worthwhile doing, and we know there's going to be a nonprofit partner, we can kind of chill out the time a little bit by doing the acquisition. So we'll continue to help. We've got money. It's not unlimited, but we've got more money than we ever had before, and we'll keep doing that. And we're going to propose, really fundamental changes. At like 15% ask just doesn't work, and they're just going to have to deal with it. You have to build complete communities. You can't allow people to build high-rises that serve people who can afford a $4 million unit, and then have them give you, a few MPDUs so they can satisfy. We've got to say, if you're building major developments, that you've got to provide affordability across the range of people that reflect this county so they can live there. That's not happening in Bethesda today, I guarantee you that. And we got to be willing to step up and say, this is what we're willing to do. If we don't, then you're going to lose this fight. You will lose, and this is your workforce, which is the scary part, which is why we think the business community needs to pay more attention to this, not less, because if you can't afford to live here and you have to go someplace else, you may be looking for work someplace else. I don't want people going to places where the housing is cheaper. They may well wind up attracting businesses who can use that workforce, and we're going to lose out. So there's an imperative for us changing the dynamic that we've been in, and we'll work with you to do that. Partner with you on the things you do, and you could look at the legislation. We'll send you copies of what we're going to propose. See what if you feel like doing the same things at a municipal level. We'd be happy to have more partners.
I wanted to say, County Executive, that you didn't say on the new announcement today about the housing is that there will be a significant number of 3 and 4 bedroom units, which is huge in solving this problem. Congratulations. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and that is part of what we need to be doing is require 3 and 4 bedroom units, because that's where families live. So I think that was a terrific announcement today, and as Lynn said, we'll try to do.
Under the current MPDU law, you're not required to build any more 3 or 4 bedroom units than the percentage of 3 or 4 bedroom units you provide for the market. So of course, they're not building any 3 or 4 bedroom units for the market, so I can't require, but we're writing other amendments that'll require 3 or 4 bedrooms, regardless of who you think you're positioning yourself toward. I don't know how people talk about integrating Bethesda and then say we're going to do this with 1 and 2 bedroom units. It's not real.
And as we saw with, 10 years ago, everybody wanted to build micro units, and then we had COVID, and we realized nobody wants to live in a micro unit. So, I think, I just think we have to stop listening to those who want to do and know what we have to provide. So, the other thing I I wanted to say to you is it's all in how we propose, but the city of Rockville is 45 minutes from all three airports. And I'm sure some of you are a little less, some of you are a little bit more, but it's important that we let people know that that's good. There are a lot of areas in this country that drive 2 hours or 3 hours, so I think we have to start changing, and I hear this at COG, you do too, or we have to start changing the message.
Narrative.
Yeah, the narrative, so that Montgomery County isn't always in the negative.
We are looking at how we present ourselves externally, because, you know, all this stuff we've done, and people are like, well, we don't know what you're doing. And it's like, this is not good.
Right.
So it's on us, on our part, to figure out what we're going to do to make sure people know what we're doing, because we've got a great story to tell, but if we don't tell it, somebody else is going to tell it for us. I mean, our classic of it, I see Rich's papers here, and I don't know if you were going to get to them.
I was.
So, you want to tell them what it is?
Yes.
This is really fun. Here's a narrative that's totally false out there.
Because we're, you know, one of our initiatives for this term is going to be to aggressively fight back against the Montgomery County sucks industrial complex. And that includes presenting information that actually tells the real story about our county. So these three loose pages that came along with you are from the Office of the Chief Financial Officer of the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia does an annual report about the tax burden for households across the region, and then they started doing a commercial tax burden. If you look at this one piece of paper that has these bar charts on both sides, this is the one about households, and it's broken down by households with an income of $25,000, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000, $150,000, and it shows that we are the second lowest tax burden in the region, and the only reason why we're above the District of Columbia is DC has, as you may know, an 85-cent residential property tax and a $1.85 commercial tax. So when you think about the impact on residents, it's much lower. So that's the major gap between Montgomery and the District of Columbia. For the Mayor Pro Tem of College Park, who's leading, you know, this chart does show Prince George's has the highest tax burden at all income levels. So, but you know, and it's very important to note, because there is no question, if you look at this report, there is no question we have a higher income tax rate than Virginia. There's
Just 1 second.
but
Madam President, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Please do. Sorry.
so, but what Virginia still has is a car tax. And that, you know, when you're thinking about cars that people in Fairfax have, you know, all of our cars, it's a hefty tax. And actually, when you see it done, the analysis by the District of Columbia government, that auto tax, that car tax does get very close to the income tax that we have in Maryland. Now, obviously, if you're going to be over $1 million of income, yes, you're going to wind up paying more in income taxes in Maryland than the car tax, unless you have lots of cars in Virginia. But it's important to note for most people, the tax burden in Montgomery County is lowest in the region. And then the other two charts
My favorite ones.
are from the DC's government's report on corporate taxes. They created a sample small business and a sample large business. And what the District of Columbia discovered is the tax burden on businesses in the region is lowest in Montgomery County, Maryland. It's a shame your colleague from Prince George's left, because they do much better here when you look at the two charts. But you can see they are that the taxes on businesses are higher elsewhere than they are in Montgomery County. And part of it, you know, shockingly, when you look at the taxes that Virginia has, you know, they have a gross receipts tax on businesses.
3% gross receipts.
So that drives up the taxes on commercial on businesses in Northern Virginia. Again, not much discussed, you know, and I'm sure if we were to do person on the street interviews where's the tax burden, between, if a business, what would you think, the tax burden between Maryland or Virginia, that they would say, oh, well, of course, Montgomery County is going to be more. In fact, it's less. So, and remember, again, for the comparisons, corporate income tax rates are set at the state level. It's a state, in both states, it's a state tax set at the state level. So.
Yeah, but the beauty of it is they juxtaposed, or they had right next to each other, the corporate income tax and the gross receipts tax. When you add the gross receipts tax to the corporate tax, they pass us. And so there's this narrative out there, and you've heard it, we've all heard it, about this is all engineered by people who are trying to drive us to give away massive subsidies to the private sector to do things that they do not give subsidies to the private sector to do in Virginia. And so they point at Virginia and say, look what they're doing. They don't tell you about all the taxes they have over there to build infrastructure, which is really what developers want. The impact taxes are really bad, not because of the money they raise, but because if you're a developer and you give us an impact tax, there is zero guarantee that we will build anything where that tax came from. There's no requirement in the law to reinvest that money in the communities it came out of. And because it's lumpy, it's not an ongoing tax for 20 or 30 years to pay off a bond, but it's a one-time tax every time somebody builds a building. You never get enough money to build a project. So it winds up going into our impact tax fund, and the first time a project somewhere in the county materializes that needs to be funded, it comes out of there with money from everywhere that winds up in one place and does nothing for the developers who provided it. I always wondered, why the development committee puts up the taxes there that, they complain about here. The real difference is at least they get something. If you're charging them more and you're building a transportation system, say like the Silver Line or the BRT lines that are going in, they can tell you, we're going to deliver transportation that's going to bring customers and workers to where you are. I take their money, we take their money, and we don't give them anything back, and we can't promise them we're going to do anything. And people have always said, it's not the money, it's the certainty. And so if we could get ourselves into the place where we can deliver the certainty, and we don't have to go as high as Virginia's gone, because we're not going to do, massive subway projects, we could provide the certainty at a lower price. We could be competitive, not just on price, but we could be competitive on amenities. And that's where I want to drive this train, is to put us in a situation where we're a good bargain, but we're also provide value. We're a good bargain now, but we don't provide any value.
So just like you want us to be at the table together, we hope you're at the table with us to fight the Montgomery County sucks industrial complex.
I think part of it also is the message, and you look at some of the areas and it's the best place to live and do business in the world, and they say it all the time, but we complain about ourselves a lot, and we don't talk about the positive attributes, and the repeated messaging is something that people start to, it gets ingrained. So I think that should be part of our efforts as well, as the rebuilding reputation, but also the proactive luring to work with us and not waiting.
Mine is really kind of leading off the last comment is, this is kind of a two-way street. So I always try to ask the question, what do you need from us? Is there legislation that you guys are proposing? I know in the past that we helped support it, didn't get approved. That issue with the commercial taxation, right? That you get to revalue it, but it doesn't. Are there bills that you would like us as a collective to try to also provide feedback to the legislatures and say, we support this bill, even though it might not significantly impact us, but it does in the long run?
Well, there's going to be our effort to get the taxing authority. We think we've got the taxing authority for special taxing districts. We'd like to include more than transportation in it, because in Virginia you would get parks and other amenities that are part of master plans. It would be good to be able to put some of that in there, because those aren't the high-ticket items, but they're things that are good to have. Doing this, by the way, unloads the burden on the CIP. Because if you take a bunch of these projects out of the CIP and you fund it with 20 or 30-year bonds, all of a sudden our ability to do capital projects just got a whole lot easier. So stay tuned for that. We're going to look at what our authority is to reconfigure parking planning without having to go to the state and not cause a major trauma. But, you know, we're hoping the council realizes that having a system that nobody else has, this is one time being unique, is not necessarily, shouldn't be a point of pride. We should figure out, and you all experience it, and you know, most of you have systems that developers consider better than ours. And you know why they consider it better than ours. So, you know, you could be helpful in trying to simplify the things we do. And all this stuff, you know, will occur on your borders and benefit you. So, you know, we'll let you know as we roll legislation out. But this is a real partnership because, you know, it's like the more this county can do economically, everybody else gets a bump out of that.
So if you have bills that come out.
Yep.
just
Sure.
let us know.
And one of the reasons why, like when we were talking about special taxing districts, and this is going to get wonky, but everyone around this table should be ready for and wanting to be wonky, but the county charter restricts any change of the weighted tax rate to a unanimous vote of all 11 members. A special taxing district that the county moves forward with is added into the weighted rate. So there is a state law that says if you're doing a special taxing district for transportation, it is exempt from a charter limitation. But if we wanted to do anything else with a special taxing district, and that's only a special taxing district for the construction of transportation. Broadly, it can be mass transit, it can be, you know, it can be roads, it can be a variety of things, but it's just construction. You can't use it for operations. So, you know, if we wanted to build out a bus rapid transit system, well, we could use the special taxing district to build it, but we can't use the special taxing district to operate it. So that's why there are some things, and that's where, you know, kind of we are in this interesting Montgomery County only conundrum of the charter provision requiring a unanimous vote. It's much better, thanks to many of you in the room, and that when we all work together to get the revenue limitation out, but there's still that rate limitation, and that's why, you know, there's work to be done with the legislature. And, you know, really, I know how exciting it is to go to a community meeting and talk about a special taxing district and the charter limitation and the average weighted property tax rate. I mean, you'd have people go, yes, 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 more and more and more. So, but that's why, you know, people like around this table, it's very helpful to then communicate that to legislators of why it's important for them to focus on these things. Because again, it's really wonky, but it is really about building for the infrastructure that everything hinges upon for our future growth.
Are you proposing language and working with any legislators on this?
We are assessing our opportunities right now with the first term. You know, it is the first year. There are a handful of new legislators from Montgomery County.
Yes.
There are going to be even more new legislators from Montgomery County. You know, so it is understanding our opportunities.
We're very fortunate now that we have a delegate who's leading, from Montgomery County, who's leading the House of Delegates, so that's great. Right.
Well, the majority leader.
Yes, right, yes.
The speaker is still from Baltimore County, but the majority leader.
And as you
All right,
guys-
so I have
As you guys look at that,
two
just one
questions.
side comment. Make sure that you include Rockville and Gaithersburg or anybody else who has development authority and zoning authority in that legislation.
Okay.
Like Lake Forest, it would be really important
Yeah.
if we could do the same thing for Lake Forest.
Yeah.
We don't have that ability.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
That's a great point.
Yeah. You can have a differential tax rate that we can't have, though.
But we cannot do tax, you know, we can do the infrastructure based on that, which is really what you're looking for when you're looking at those redevelopment projects. You know, there's an 84-inch water line that's really a lot of water coming from the county going across us into those three ponds that has to be relocated to make the development work.
So I'd like to throw something back out on the table that I think I've discussed with you in the past. A good idea that Virginia has had and is doing to fund a lot of this infrastructure, which is they created a special taxing district essentially for all of Northern Virginia, mostly funded through a modest addition to the sales tax that was approved by the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, many years ago. They generate several $100 million a year of recurring bondable revenue that is dedicated to improving transportation in the region. So it's something that we would probably have to work with the surrounding counties and then get the state to approve. But, you know, it's a great idea that Virginia has that's helping them do what they do that is more challenging for us. So is there some way that we can marshal the forces and get whether it's an exact duplicate of this program or not, but something that helps Prince George's and Montgomery and Frederick counties with our transportation and other infrastructure needs?
We could see what their appetite is for this in terms of what they think their projects are. And a lot of, you know, I think one difference here, a lot of these projects are on the state. If it's on a major road here, it's on the state, and not a county road. And so I'm not sure, the state doesn't grant us the authority to just reconfigure their infrastructure to what we want.
Yeah, I understand that Virginia's transportation funding in particular is very different than ours. So
Yeah.
the state pays for everything. But
All the roads.
all the roads,
The counties pay for all the transit.
yeah, understood, but
All the community
anyway,
colleges.
it seemed like a good formula, and it handles the dispensing of funds regionally and to local localities, the counties and municipalities as well. And there's a lot of things in that program that make a lot of sense to me as I've looked into it. So, and talking about needing a way to pay for this stuff, it's something that I think we should be taking a good hard look at and see if it makes sense.
I know
Look at it.
personally, my view as a legislator had been, it's a good idea. I don't want us to do a tax on ourselves that allows the state to go, oh, great, they're good. And they take their view and their money, which we have all paid into, to go to the rest of the state. So
So Virginia was very clever about that, in that part of the law required the state to continue
Yes.
existing funding to that region. This is all incremental. So they're on to, you know, we know about lottery funding going to schools, and they take the other school money away. We obviously have to be careful about that.
Well, the deal they cut in Virginia, because the developers in the county went down and asked the state for these various authorities and taxes. And the deal that the state said is it was their continued aid or additional aid was contingent on the counties taxing themselves. They were not going to do this unless the counties, if they gave them the authority, if the counties put the taxes in place, Virginia would provide what they needed to provide, but they were not going to give the counties money if they were unwilling to tax themselves, which I thought was kind of fascinating. I've asked the previous governor to blackmail us and do the same thing.
So I looked at the questions that I got in advance. There were two that we didn't get to, and I see some other hands, but I want to wrap us up soon, because I know people have to go home. I know that Andy had a crystal ball Thrive question. Do you want
I just had a question about this topic, because it's my understanding that you have to have a legislative proposal in by the first week in February, which gives you less than 3 weeks to come up with whatever it is that you can do. So is that realistic? Do you think you can put together a proposal that the delegation would buy into and sponsor in time? I mean, there's not much time, and sounds like all really good ideas, but not coalesced into an actual proposal that would be doable in 3 weeks.
But some things we have authority for. We can create a special taxing district for transportation tomorrow. I could live with that today and then figure out where we want to go next year. We may even spend the year building a larger consensus on the council to do some of this stuff.
That makes more sense. Thank you.
Are you okay with the other question? Yes. Okay. All right. Shane.
So just a couple of things. Number one, I hope you're sharing these lovely EC charts with more than just fellow government officials. I had a question. One of the things we're really grappling with, especially inside the Beltway, possibly other municipalities outside the Beltway are as well, is stormwater management. And specifically, the stormwater waivers that are very routinely being granted by the county's Department permitting services, which stormwater waivers equal revenue to the county. That's actually, well,
I hate them.
we've received charts that show that just within Chevy Chase Village, the county has received tens of thousands of dollars in stormwater waivers. And that money, we can't really figure out where it's going. How is that actually going to improve the stormwater infrastructure? Because when a waiver is issued, that means that a homeowner is not having to put in stormwater management solutions. They then have to get permits and authorities through us, and we're requiring that they still put in stormwater solutions because we're left holding the bag, if you will. And we are also having to implement on our dime infrastructure projects to manage all of this water. So there's a disconnect between money that the county is collecting for stormwater management waivers, and then we're having to put more money out to deal with these very large development projects, that something has to be done to deal with the water. So not something that we need to resolve tonight, but we really, over the next year, need to have a conversation between the municipalities and the county about how this process is working out. Number one, do as many of the stormwater waivers that are being issued really need to be issued, or is there a higher bar and standard that these developers need to be held to? And number two, how can we ensure that this money that is being collected is coming back into the community? We've been in conversations with the county about a stormwater management project that we would like to partner with you all on, and we've been told for now at least 6 years, we don't have the money, we don't have the money, we don't have the money. And looking at the money that you all have collected in stormwater waiver fees, you all could pay your share of this project twofold by now.
Could you send me the information on that and how much
Yeah.
we collected? I will be frank with you. I have asked that we end quantity and quality waivers. My department has not done that. And the argument is that developers will put ungodly pressure, because I'd have to get the council to approve that, that they don't want to pay the money. And so we're up against not just a county decision to waive things, but the impact of the waiver is that somebody who doesn't want to pay money is going to be forced to pay money. I would love for all of you to write to council and say, you need to do this.
And that's why I think it would be
I will
helpful
give
if
you
we
a
can
bill to do it with.
really kind of go over the details and specifics of it, and then
Yep.
come together to the council to figure out what the proposals and what the things need to be. But it's really a problem for us.
Yes.
The second thing I wanted to.
Can you also follow up with
Yeah.
the Ms. Bryant, who's
Yes,
right
yes,
there, so that we can,
absolutely.
okay.
Absolutely. The second thing was I wanted to just hear a little bit more about the budget forecasting for FY24 revenues. It seems like we're in a good place, but what are the current estimates as far as cost of living for county personnel and other personnel costs, and just kind of how are you looking in regard to inflation and some of the uncertainty about whether we'll have a little R or a big R and all those kinds of things. Just for those of us who are in the midst of putting together our municipal budgets, what are your thoughts about kind of the operating expense side of the county budget for FY24?
Well, we are in negotiations with all three unions, so I can't tell you yet what the, I'm getting texts from the mediation session going on right now with one of the three unions, so I can't tell you where we are going to end up there. So, from a revenue standpoint, I think the best thing I can do is direct you to, and Ken can send it out to everyone, both the last report of the revenue estimating group. We now have a joint executive council estimating group that provides information about where things are going, and we have the report from December, and then also the State Board of Revenue Estimates. They're meeting in December, and they did bring down state income tax revenue forecasts by, I think, 0.3% for the remainder of '23, and a little bit more in FY24, and that's the personal income tax. They did bring down they did lower the forecast tremendously. It's still part of the personal income tax, but on capital gains, which, you know, impacts us, impacts many of you. So, but, you know, they decided capital gains was going to decline by 30%, but that's 30% off of the all-time record high. You know, so it would still be, to go back to our conversation about, it would still be a much higher level than it was during much of the last decade. It's just a precipitous drop. David, I don't know if he's trying to talk behind you, but we will be getting a new forecast from our outside consultants, Moody's Analytics. The nonpartisan staff agency will be releasing, the Department of Legislative Services will be releasing a forecast next week. So you can follow along, because they are all projecting the income tax. And, you know, you're not going to have a recession in Montgomery County that doesn't occur in the state, too. So, you know, so following along with how they're forecasting gives you a clue as to where we might also wind up.
I'm going through my list of questions. Mayor Newton, you had some comments earlier about transportation, Vision Zero, and 270. Did you want to ask those? I'm just going through my list to make sure we got everybody. Go ahead.
Should we start bringing the cots in?
No, this is the last one.
Oh, okay.
What about 270? What are you all thinking about 230, and are you thinking about?
So I'm going to be on this committee that the governor's got to look at this. We had one meeting, and my position's, you know, pretty basic. Where I was before, the project, whatever they build, should go from Frederick to the bridge. And, you know, the idea that northern Montgomery County wasn't going to get anything out of this, and we weren't able to hold it up at the TPB is unfortunate, because if we had blocked the governor at the TPB, they would have negotiated with us. And when we didn't block them, they had no reason to negotiate with us. So, and I believe, you know, I've talked to folks in Frederick. I don't know what they were thinking, because the governor had no plan to go north of the ICC. No definite plan. So, but I do think you need to link them together. I'm going to push, you know, for the reversibles, but depending how you work the road, what you decide to do, there is room on large portions of it for 2 lanes in each direction with no going outside the boundaries. And so we should look at that. The big impediment, and they were going to have to do this under the governor's original plan anyway, is to take out the bridges that exist and replace them with clear spans so that you could recapture the inside service lane, which they did, ironically, in the southern part of 270 going into Falls Road at Rockville. Recapture the inside service lane, which exists from the ICC to 70, where it runs into 270 and Frederick, including over the Monocacy River, which everybody said, what are you going to do about the Monocacy River? It's like, I don't know, there are 2 concrete lanes on either side of the 2 asphalt lanes. One of them would work perfectly fine. So I will ask them in the short term to recapture the inside service lanes and see what it does. And if any of you, I won't get geeky on traffic numbers, but in Frederick, going from 2 lanes to 3 lanes is a 1/3 reduction in traffic on all lanes. Going from 3 lanes to 4 lanes in Montgomery County is a 1/4 reduction in traffic in each of the lanes. That's not insignificant. And my view from talking with Greg, because I was negotiating with Greg, was that they didn't want to do any of that stuff because to the extent that it showed traffic relief, it would undermine the governor's case for an extravagant, incredibly expensive project.
Exactly.
So I'm going to ask them to do as much of that as they can possibly do, that they look at what they can do with taking out the bridges as part of a project. I'm not convinced at all it needs to be a toll project. I do not understand why the governor didn't start out by going for the federal government for money rather than not doing it until it was obvious, apparently, that he wasn't going to be able to make his scheme work. So we delayed years where we could have gotten ourselves in line. So now we're going to try to get ourselves in line. I talked with Slater, I suggested 2 ways of dealing with the Western Beltway that didn't involve widening it. He told me both things I suggested had been proposed by the losing bidders, and both of them would have prevented this thing going into the walls that exist. And so I would ask them to take a hard look at that. There are other jurisdictions. If you Google cantilevering roadways, you'll find other jurisdictions that have added pylons. You know where the barriers are, and there's that safety area on both sides? They put pylons in the barriers, and they literally cantilever 2 lanes, which balances each other over 2 lanes of the existing roadway, and it's down the center. And they do that in other jurisdictions that have constraint. And so if you've got a constrained right-of-way here, this is an option. And frankly, it's less disruptive than the kind of total rebuild of the road that they were envisioning. So I'm going to kind of push on those things. And like knowing that other people who bid on this propose that is a little bit empowering, because you're not out on your own and saying nobody thought about it. You could say, go look at what the other people, and I think the governor will do that. I think Transurban is desperate to stay in the project. Conceivably, they could agree to anything, but I honestly don't believe. I guess my objection to the toll scheme is they will borrow money for more than we would borrow money for. Their rate of borrowing is higher, and they wanted a rate of return on their borrowing. I'm like, really, seriously? It's not even your money, and I'm going to pay you for getting me money on top of the higher interest rate? So if the state were to do its own bond on this, it would not be as expensive. It may not require a toll lane. We didn't require a toll lane to do the American Legion Bridge, which was built to hold the subway going across it. So I can't imagine why we can't get to a more reasonable solution. And I will let you know, and as well as the advocates know, as we go along into negotiations, so we all know what we're dealing with.
So 3 quick points. If we could fix the bottleneck, it's like a catch-up
Yep.
bottle. We could fix the bottleneck where the lanes go from 6 to 2. And then from further down, then the road would open up. That would be one quick fix. The other one is the federal money for the bridge. That should be done just like the Wilson Bridge was done. And number 3, the thing that concerns me the most is toll roads. And because it's so aggressive to people. But when you look at, if you look at what Transurban or whoever did in Virginia now at 66, they just upped that toll. And we will have no control over what that is. So I just, let me know, let us know what we can do to help.
I will do everything I can to convince the governor not to do this as a toll road. But we do need, the good thing is he has been very clear we need to do something. And I'm not confusing the issue, because I also agreed we need to do something. So if we all agree we need to do something, we can focus on what's the best thing to do, rather than what will get you campaign contributions into your presidential race.
Right. And then one final point to that, it's not necessarily Vision Zero, but there was a proposal years ago that had a hyperbiker trail from Frederick down to the American Legion Bridge. And the hyperbiker trail could run within the right-of-way on the side, but it would also allow access down to the canal in certain places to get people down to that access point. So just something to think about, ways to connect us, and we don't have the rails to trails necessarily, but we can do something that we connect to the rails to trails as people try to go from the East Coast across. Thank you.
Can you make very quick?
Yeah, real quick. And Mark, thank you for all the things you've been doing out in the western part of Montgomery County. We appreciate you coming to the Whitesbury rally. And speaking of Whitesbury, any updates on Whitesbury?
So,
And we're on camera.
that's okay.
Okay.
So I won't go into details, I can't say. So some things were suggested and rejected as I expected. So it's going to get revised into a form that out of the rejection they think might be more palatable. I'm perfectly comfortable, which I think, with the solution that involves levying a 50-cent per trip tax and paying for the landing and getting this over with. So I'm going to allow one more iteration of let's make a deal, and then I'm going to make the deal I know I could make, because this has gone on way too long.
And we say 2 years too long, so.
I agree. But I am personally involved in this now.
Can I tell a fun White's Ferry story?
Monique, that's on him.
So I did some genealogy, and I discovered I have a great-great-great-grandfather who served in the Pennsylvania militia during the Civil War. He was part of the regiment that was sent to the U.S. Capitol, to D.C. right at the beginning of the war. They were assigned to Capitol Hill, then out to Kalorama, and then his unit was sent on the Montgomery expedition to seize the ferries, to stop the small arm transfers from occurring on the Potomac River. So I'm happy to be the second person in my family possibly to seize the ferry, for the Union. Yes, there you go. So that's
It would.
So I won't open this topic up, but I do want to say we've had some dedicated meetings on Vision Zero and climate change, so we appreciate all the work so we can be a leader in that area. I know that you're working on a letter to MDOT on a variety of transportation things. I just wanted to put a plug that from our meeting, there were certain commitments that we said we would collectively move forward in asking the state for on Vision Zero, with better, going beyond lighting and intersections, going beyond intersections and lighting, as well as looking at the most dangerous spaces to correct. So I just wanted to put that on the record. I know you're in the midst of doing that review in that letter now.
I would say from a practical point of things you can do, I mean, we've started doing a lot of pylons. And, you know, I saw this in DC before we started doing it at any scale here, and I was kind of amazed. And every time I drive into the district, they have more and more of these intersections that have been squared off. And I just flat out think we just got to get state permission to do it on intersections of state highways and square off all these corners so cars can't swing around the corners. It doesn't narrow, it doesn't take away a lane. It just means you actually have to decelerate and make a serious right turn as opposed to just and go right into the other lane without losing speed. That's an easy thing for all of us to do. They don't cost much, and they're effective in terms of changing driver behavior. And if drivers aren't sufficiently responsive, you can always put concrete planters on the other side of the posts so that they're dissuaded from thinking knocking into the post is no big deal. But there are ways to do this, and I think we ought to be doing more of it. You know, not every solution has to be hardscape and massive curbs and lots of concrete pouring. A lot of this stuff can just be done, and it seems to work really well in the district.
Thank you for the generosity of your time. We really appreciate you spending time with us, and again, thank you for tax due.
Yeah. You guys work really hard. I sat on this other side of this, so I know what it takes to be a municipal official, so I would not want to shortchange you of your opportunity to talk.
And I've taken action items on some of the things that we said we'll follow up with you on, and then we'll share with the municipalities. Thank you.
And I'm sure Ken was.